Thank you for joining us today. I want to thank you all for being able to be with us today in this cold, rainy, I don't know if it's snowing where you're at. Today we have with us special guest CJ Petitt. She will be discussing employee vaccination, which is part of our HR series. And with that, I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Francisca. I'm so happy to be here. This topic is so timely, and this question seems to be popping up more and more. And the question is, can employers require their employees to get vaccinated? And what are kind of the parameters of that? And the consequences. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is just how do you handle vaccinations specifically related to COVID. So my background is HR, and I have a safety background as well. And so we want to be sure and look at this issue from several different perspectives today. We've got a lot of different agencies, regulatory agencies, that are in play when it comes to employee vaccinations. So the long and short of it is that even though vaccination rollout has been slow initially, we still have several good vaccine candidates that are being rolled out across the world. Of course, you know, Pfizer and Moderna. That's in the US, Pfizer being the first that was approved. AstraZeneca is in the UK and also in South Africa. Johnson & Johnson just applied last week for emergency approval from the CDC to apply for approval to roll out. It is a one dose vaccine, and that should be hitting the ground, here very soon. Another one is Novavax, that's been in the news lately. Novavax is a standout because it uses an existing vaccine therapy, but just applies it to COVID. Something that's interesting is that just very recently, Novavax completed a trial in the UK and a trial in South Africa. And that's important because by the end of March, the UK strand is supposed to be dominant in the US. And then South Africa, the South Africa version strand will be following it. And Novavax has shown itself to be effective against all three. And so you look at this and you say, well, this is wonderful news. And all of these were developed quickly but safely. And there have been long lines of people who have been wanting to get vaccinated. And so the critical piece of the puzzle is actually getting shots into people's arms. The new Biden administration has committed to 1 million vaccinations in 100 days. We're not quite sure if that's going to happen, but they're going to give it their darndest. And so you're going to see that over 9 million people so far have received their second vaccination. And so it's on its way. The question for small businesses is, what do I do now based upon my industry? Can I require my employees to get the vaccination as soon as it's available for their community. So let's talk about that, because there are several different regulatory agencies in play. One is the EEOC, of course, and with the EEOC comes Title VII. Title VII influences the EEOC's stance in a number of different ways, and we're going to talk about that. Title VII is the EEO law that was passed in 1964. It's not 1,000 years old. It just feels like it. So on my slide, I have that it was developed in 1064. Now, another regulatory agency that's front and center is also OSHA. And so each of these have provided some guidelines, but are still missing some key pieces when it comes to guiding employers on handle the COVID vaccination specifically. Here's what we're dealing with. Basically, the EEOC issued guidelines on the H1N1 vaccine back in 2009. And in that guideline, they said that employers could mandate the vaccine, but it is subject to exemptions for accommodations. And you say, what kind of accommodations? Well, let's talk about that. A lot of times when we think of accommodations, we really think of the Americans with Disabilities Act and disability accommodation. With COVID and with vaccines, it's not quite that simple. And so the EEOC said that employers should consider simply encouraging employees to take the vaccine rather than requiring them to take it. So let's talk about how does that apply to COVID? So again, the EEOC has not yet weighed in on how to deal with COVID vaccinations and whether or not they can be required, but it's highly anticipated that they are going to continue following the guidelines that they've already put out regarding vaccines, regarding the flu vaccine, regarding the H1N1 vaccine, that they're going to continue the recommendations that they've already made. COVID is a little different, and we'll talk about how it's different later on in the presentation. So if you do mandate the co-vaccine with your employees, you will be required to follow some Title VII accommodation exceptions to that. And the reason why is because vaccines are actually considered a medical exam. That's how they're, in a legal sense, that's what they are considered. And in order to mandate a medical exam or a vaccination, one, it has to be job related, and two, it has to be consistent with business necessity. So you think of hospital employers, you think, well, gosh, hospitals, if anything's going to be job related or consistent with business necessity, it's going to be hospitals and their employees. So hospitals are going in and talking to their employees about the vaccine, but even hospitals, believe it or not, even in a hospital setting, employees can say thanks, but no thanks, and be exempted from having to take the vaccine. Of course, no retaliation allowed. So doesn't that just blow your mind? Like a hospital, not even a hospital, can require a vaccine without any exceptions? And the answer is yes. It even goes as far as this. If you look at accommodation in the court cases that have recent court cases, you will find that in 2018, a case was concluded that anxiety over having to take the vaccine and the effects of the vaccine may be considered a disability. So in this case, an employee had anxiety over the side effects of the vaccine and was exempted from having to take it. So I don't know if your mind is blown yet, but that's the level of accommodations that employers need to be equipped to deal with, because that's not necessarily what you normally think of as a disability under the ADA. What small businesses have to be prepared to do is engage in an interactive process with their employees. You know, back in the old school days, 80s, 90s, the way it worked is an employee said, I need an accommodation, and the business would say, that works or it doesn't work. And that was the end of the conversation. That doesn't cut it anymore. So employers, not only are employers required to evaluate their employees' request for accommodations, they're required to do their homework and try and figure out, are there alternatives that would work? Let's look at the essential job functions. Are there any other alternatives that could be used to help this employee with this accommodation? You've heard of undue hardship, significant difficulty, cost, all those things weigh into it, especially when you're dealing with a disability. The impact that it has on coworkers, customers, your business, all of those things factor into determining whether an accommodation is feasible for your business. But here's the thing is, when it comes to vaccines, it gets a little iffy, because disability isn't the only type of accommodation that can be requested. And so employers are required to think outside the box and engage interactively in good faith with their employees to develop a solution or an exemption to their requirements. You're going to want to take a look at what kind of workplace and what kind of job duties are your employees required to have? How big is your business? Can you afford to make those alternatives? Here's an example. Let's say that you've got 5 employees, and that 3 of those employees could telework, but 2 of them can't. 2 of them have to be in the office. And in the office, they are separated by 6 feet. They're wearing masks, right? And so if you come in and you say, for those 2 employees, we want to require you to get the vaccine to safeguard when you're going to be dealing with people in the office, maybe dealing with visitors and customers. And so then you've got to step back and go, what do I do? Do I allow some employees to work from home, or do maybe I have to shut my business down for a couple of weeks because there's a breakout and I need all of my employees to go home? Maybe someone gets sick. I've dealt with a lot of issues like that. One person in the office gets sick. Nobody wants to be in the office for 2 weeks. They want to quarantine. And so how does that impact your business? And so businesses have to be very flexible when it comes to dealing with vaccines and alternatives to keeping people safe. Title VII, again, it's not just about disability. It's also about religious accommodation. And it doesn't have to be a religion like, maybe like top 5 religions. We're going to go with Catholic, Greek Orthodoxy, Baptist, Jewish. Let's say that you've got Muslim. Let's say you've got employees with a wide variety of religious beliefs. And then you've got this one person over here who is vegan. Is vegan a religion? What do y'all think? So I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to give you some secret sauce. Vegan can actually be count as a religion in terms of a requested accommodation to not take a vaccine. So that's where small businesses can get themselves in trouble and go, that's not a religion I've ever heard of. That's not a legitimate religion. Forget it. You got to take the vaccine. So the belief has to be religious. It has to be sincerely upheld. It can't pose an undue hardship, but it doesn't have to be a religion that you've heard of in order for it to count. So here's an example for you in recent court cases. In the first court case, the employee did not want to take the vaccine because she believed our bodies are a temple and that God gives us dominion over our bodies, and injecting the flu vaccine into the body is morally wrong, right? She worked at a hospital in North Carolina, and she refused to take the vaccine, and she was fired. She filed suit, and the EEOC sided with her, the court sided with her, that her religious objection to taking the vaccine was legitimate, and that the hospital should have allowed her to refuse to take the vaccine. Thanks, but no thanks. So how far do you go with this? So you're talking about a religious belief, which is our bodies are a temple, I ain't taking the vaccine, to I'm a vegan, I don't do that. And it may not be per se a religion, but it's a tightly held value that is considered the same as a religiously held belief in refusing to take the vaccine. The second example, it flip-flopped, and this is why this is such a gray area, because one person said that they didn't want to harm their own body because the flu vaccine may do more harm than good. That person lost that lawsuit because the court said that is a personal medical opinion. It's not a religious opinion, right? So the first case she won it. She didn't have to take, she got compensated for being fired. The second one was thrown out and said, you know what, that's not a religious reason for not wanting to take the vaccine. That's just your personal opinion about it. And so those two cases turned out very differently, even though they had a lot in common in terms of refusing to take the vaccine. So, if somebody has a, moving on to OSHA, OSHA put out an interpretation letter in 2009. And they said an employee with a medical condition who refuses the vaccine, they have a reasonable belief that the shot would lead to serious injury, illness, or death, that they would be protected. So that's an exemption. So under OSHA, not necessarily under EEOC Title VII, but under OSHA, an employee has the right to refuse vaccination because they believe that it will cause them to either get ill, seriously ill, or sick as a result. And so if you notice that that's a reasonable belief, that's a very gray statement. And so how do small businesses know what's considered a reasonable belief and what's, maybe a little wacko? So it is an important consideration when it comes to small business, because small businesses don't usually have an army of legal scholars behind them to help them walk through all of these decisions. But what studies are showing, ironically, is that employees are more likely to take the vaccine if they're not required. There was several polls taken last year over the course of several months, and employees were asked, would you take the vaccine? And they said yes, and would turn around and ask, would you take the vaccine if your employer required it? And they said no. The majority said yes. If it wasn't a requirement, they would go for it. But the polls indicated that less than half would still take the vaccine if it were required by. So it's by their job. So it's like a game of psychology almost. That if it's something that you're told you got to do it, then you're like, nope, not going to do it. I'll just wait for what, I don't know. But that's one of the tricky pieces of it. So another thing that's tricky is for small businesses, because small businesses are trying to protect themselves from two different liabilities. One liability is, if I don't require the vaccines and someone gets sick, am I going to get sued for having exposed them? The other side of it is, if I mandate vaccines and somebody gets sick or somebody doesn't want the vaccine, then what am I doing? Am I setting myself up for another type of lawsuit? And so small businesses are feeling crunched in the middle. The reason why is that COVID-19 is legally considered what's called a direct threat. And employers do have the right to reject accommodation request if granting the exemption would cause a direct threat. So you kind of see how it gets confusing and can go back and forth. So the question then becomes is if I require my employees to take the vaccine and one of them needs an exception, so I grant them an exception, if that causes a breakout, causes harm to that employee or to another employee, am I on the hook as a small business for having granted that exception? And the courts still don't know. That's the reason why that we're waiting to see exactly how the EEOC and OSHA are going to address the issue. And what small businesses are finding is that it's hard to get insurance that covers claims specific to COVID. And so employers are needing to triangulate a lot of different pieces of the puzzle to develop their COVID policies. So let's talk about alternatives. If you do not mandate vaccines, what does that mean? What are some things that you may be able to work out in the process? One is reassigning to a different position, if that's possible. Maybe you've got someone who has underlying health conditions, and they could maybe swap out a job with somebody that is doing more office work or teleworking. That may be an option for even small businesses. Telework, that we keep coming back to this. a lot of jobs are still out on telework. And what the legal community is saying is that the longer that people stay out on teleworking due to COVID, the more likely they're going to continue to do so after COVID. I know of a lot of small businesses, they want their employees to come into the office. Maybe their employees are not as productive. Maybe there are connectivity issues. Maybe, and this happens to a lot of people, the majority of people. If they're teleworking, where are the kids? Kids are out of school. And so it becomes that teleworking has taken on a lot of new meaning. And the question is that for small businesses, do I want to require my employees to get the vaccine and then get themselves back into work, right? In the office. There are a lot of small businesses who are paying good money to rent offices that are empty because everybody's telecommuting. And so they're stuck between paying rent and trying to figure out how to accommodate teleworking situations. And then how long do I do that, right? Like I said at the beginning, the goal is, the promise is, 1 million vaccinations in 100 days. So if people do sign up for that, they do get their vaccinations and they say, hey, I'm vaccinated, I want to come back in the office and work in the office. If nothing else, to get away from their kids that are working, that are taking school from home, right? Then that's great. But what if you've got employees who it's time, everybody else has gotten vaccinated and they're back in the office working, or at least back in the office on a part-time basis working, and you've got one or two holdouts who are saying, I don't want to get the vaccine, I've got a problem with the vaccine, whatever that is, religious or disability accommodation, or maybe even just anxiety. And they're not ready to come back into the office yet. And so that's where you kind of got to grapple with, can I make an exception for those individuals? Can you modify their duties? Modification of duties can be in a number of different ways. Modify how they do their jobs, modify when they do their jobs. Can they come in on an early morning shift? And then, and can you limit the number of people that are, in your office at the same time? Mask and face coverings. The CDC just published guidelines that says that double masking works, that it's been helpful with the new variants that are extra contagious. And so the CDC is recommending double masking and making sure that the fittings of the mask are correct so that you can get the protection that you need. The other piece of the puzzle is a leave of absence. Sometimes when you think of leave of absence, you think of FMLA. And how long is FMLA? FMLA is 12 weeks, right? 12 weeks of job protected leave. So what is a leave of absence? Well, a leave of absence can be 6 months, right? And so even if you're a small business and you don't fall under the FMLA guidelines requirements yet, you can still provide your employee an unpaid leave of absence, maybe a 6-month leave of absence, and then revisit the issue in 6 months to see, okay, is it safe to bring this person back? It's a lot of tricky issues, because if you've got a business that's dealing with the public, like a restaurant, or what I've seen a lot of is therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. there are a lot of people who are still needing services and therapies, but going into the office is an option. Sometime in COVID, just like home health therapy is an option. And so if you've got an employee, you've got a home health therapy company, and you've got an employee who doesn't want to take the vaccine, maybe they've got a medical condition that wouldn't go well with the vaccine. And then you've got to figure out, what can I do? Because this employee doesn't want to risk going into someone's home and getting sick, and yet they can't take the vaccine. So what you might want to do is go ahead and figure out some sort of short-term leave of absence so that you can reassess what are our numbers going to look like in 2 or 3 months. And so those are all alternatives to just firing someone. What you don't want to do is be inflexible and not accommodate any request, or maybe somebody makes a request and it doesn't make sense to you. It's part of that good faith interaction that both the EEOC and OSHA requires of all businesses, to try and problem solve together how to retain this person's a person's job to the fullest extent possible, and yet still operate a profitable business. And so the key thing, what you want to do is that you want to develop a vaccine policy. Avoid harassment first and foremost. The number one EEOC claim for the last 5 years has been retaliation. So if an employee needs an exception, the last thing you want to do is get mad at them or retaliate, cut their hours, find a way to get them fired. It's called constructive discharge, where you make someone's life so miserable that they quit, they give up and they quit. That's called constructive discharge. It's looked on as retaliation, a lot of times full out retaliation by the EEOC, and that can get very expensive. So take a look at what you're doing. What I'd like to see is if you have if you're going to be encouraging your employees to get the vaccinations, or having them get the vaccinations either in your office, or maybe requiring them to go out to the pharmacy and get vaccinated there, develop a form so that they can list any exceptions or accommodations that they may need as a result of that. So what I have, and I'm including with this presentation, SHRM, which is the Society for HR Management, they have developed a couple of sample policies. And one of the policies is for businesses that are going to be mandating the vaccine, and the other is not. And so I'm going to just provide a copy of those two SHRM samples for attendees, so that if they want to start developing their vaccination strategy, they can do it now. What I don't want to see is that as the vaccinations become more available, let's say mid-March, the vaccines are starting to really roll out and become available, and you need or want your employees to get that vaccine. What I don't want to see you do is get caught flat-footed and go, I'm going to fire you because being vegan is no good excuse for refusing to take the vaccine, and then ending up with an EEO claim on your hands. So what you're going to want to do is to have a strategy. What exactly do you need your policy to look like? And then have a user-friendly form for your employees so that they can read what your policies is. They can sign it. If they need an exemption, it's just a simple form that they can fill out. I need an exemption and this is why. And then be prepared at that point to have a good faith dialogue with your employee, back and forth, problem solving with them. How can we work with each other to keep you safe and yet still be able to manage the business? Be sure and keep up with your record keeping. If you've got employees who have been out on quarantine or have had other issues, childcare issues, all that record keeping will help you out so that you know when somebody comes to you how many times that they've already been out and what you would be looking at for the next, say, 3 to 6 months in terms of their ability to actually be productive and work. So those are the key takeaways for today's session. Today's session was really about being more of a Q&A and about trying to make sure that if you've had weird situations come up that you know how to handle them. And to kind of just to wrap up, I want to bring in a couple of CDC guidelines that have been updated in the past few weeks. And, the CDC is really considering close contact to be 15 minutes over the period of 24 hours of contact that's within 6 feet of somebody who has tested positive. And so let's say that you've got one employee, let's say you've got a restaurant, you've got 10 employees that worked at the restaurant, and you found out later that the one of the employees tested positive. Technically, the CDC is recommending that you wait until either day 5 or day 7 to get the test. And to give you kind of an example of this, a small business that I know, they had one employee who tested positive, she had contact, and she went and got a rapid results test and tested negative. And then she went and she got I think it's called a PCR test, that the nasal swab that takes a little bit longer for the results to come back, and it came back positive. And we don't know if it's just a quality issue in terms of the quality of the results from the rapid test versus the PCR test, or if it was the fact that it took her over 24 hours to get those two tests. And in that 24 hours is when it showed up in her system. So the timing is critical. If you have close contact and you turn around and get a rapid test the next day, it's going to be, the CDC is saying that it's useless. And so waiting 5 to 7 days is the key. Also note that the Families First Act subsidy is still available on a voluntary basis through the end of March. So although it's not required, if you do have an employee that needs to quarantine, you can still pay them and get reimbursed when you go to file your payroll taxes. And I also have a handy dandy flow chart. If you would like a copy of it, just email me and I'll be happy to reply back with it. And basically, if somebody needs to quarantine because they've been exposed, they can get paid at 100%. If they're a caregiver for somebody that's been exposed, or childcare reasons, they get paid at 2/3 their regular pay rate. And in which case, then both of those, you can voluntarily pay them and then get reimbursed from the federal government for that expense. So keep it in mind that we're still in the age of COVID. We're not in the age of vaccinations just yet. So we're kind of crossing over and trying to keep what your options are, kind of keeping those straight, can be a little bit of a brain scratcher. So does anybody have any questions or concerns?
Please, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself if it's a little bit faster than putting it in the chat box.
I have a question, please.
Okay.
So basically, my question is this. Right now, as we're talking, I have an employee whose husband has COVID. She's needing to take him to the hospital back and forth, and it's been like 10 days like this. And she's working when she can, because she works from home and she has children and she works from home for that reason. So what I'm hearing right now is that I could pay her without her working if I use the government possibility of going to the COVID program, like the protection for the families.
Yes, it is. It's called Families First Corona. I don't know. FFCRA is what it's short for, and that is correct. Through till March, then you can pay her for. Now, keep in mind it's 2/3 of her regular rate of pay. But
yes,
if she's
she wants to be willing to do that, but right now she's basically working as she can because she comes and goes. And I'm thinking that it would be ideal for her not to work, but I cannot afford to pay her without working. But if I can pay 1/3 and the government can pay 2/3, or if she can work 1/3 and the government can pay for the second third, that might be a possibility. Because of course now the husband is not working and he's under commission, so it is a very tough situation.
It is, so it's a double whammy for her.
No.
Yes, it is, and that's what it's there. Did this happen last year? Because if it's just happening,
it is right now. Right now.
Okay,
then that's perfect. We're talking.
Yeah, and so what you want to do is get with your payroll system and ask them, how do you code the Families First Act? It's FFCRA. How do you code that in the system? Because they need to be able to capture and calculate the pay for her and to submit it for reimbursement. And I've heard of some payroll systems getting reimbursed right away. Some wait until the end of the quarter, but talk with your payroll system and your accountant to get that connected.
Okay, and is it legal that I pay her the 1/3 if she works it?
Yes.
So she can work for the 1/3 and I can ask the government to pay for the 2/3 without working?
Yes. Yes, so basically the hours, let's say that she works 2 hours and she doesn't work 6 hours. For those 6 hours, she'll get 2/3 pay.
Okay, I will ask immediately because I think that will be such a relief for her.
Yes, a lot of people don't realize that that's been extended.
Also, Louisa? Because it is a huge amount. Hi, Deirdre.
Hello. Also, have you applied for the PPP, the Paycheck Protection?
I had, but in the past.
Have you applied for the second round?
No.
I know that Francisca can help you and point you to the right person to help you to do that. Are you already? Yes. Okay, awesome. Francisca will make sure, because remember, any expenditures that you have that are on behalf of payroll are going to be forgivable. So in addition to taking advantage of the FFCRA, being continued through the end of March. That's a great opportunity. But remember also, you have the opportunity to apply for another round of forgivable assistance through that second round of PPP. And so I know Francisca can make sure to tell you who to contact to do that, because I think this is a great opportunity that you want to take advantage of now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, do it.
There's
Yeah, that's super important.
There's two things here, Louisa, that I would suggest. You're currently assigned with Orlando. Do you have his email? If so, you may want to shoot him an email. And then what I would also suggest is, since you have additional HR questions, we do have CJ as a consultant as it relates to COVID. So you may want to ask him if he can kind of do a referral to CJ for you so that y'all two can connect as well.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I can help you with some of these weird COVID issues that are coming up.
Thank you so much. I think that the best suggestion that I heard is to allow the workers to do as they wish, because it is so complicated when you try to get into the mind system of people, because vegan is not a religion, definitely. But you can have a religion that supports to be vegan, that you want to be vegan because your religion gears you into that direction.
Yes.
But in itself, it's a diet. No, it is a way of eating. No, it is like being,
but it was
like if you say I'm carnivorous and that's a religion. No, it is not.
no,
It is a way of eating. No, it is not a way of, and you choose it because of the way you think, but it is not a religion.
It's not a religion, but it's almost like it's approaching religious territory, because vegans, it's not just about not what they eat, it's about what they don't wear and what it's like a lifestyle.
Yes,
and
of
not,
choosing. It is a way of living.
Yeah.
It is but you can say that about everything, really, about everything, and you can say it's my religion. Well, it is not.
And that's where it gets tricky. So, it's like it's kind of like the EEOC said back in 2009. They said, encourage vaccinations. It's more important to encourage them than to require it. And oh, by the way, when you require it, people get really resistant. Somebody that would take the vaccine and not think about it, you say, oh, well, you have to, they'd be like, oh, no, I don't.
And also, if they have any bad experience with that, you can be liable for that. Other than even if, like I just went to my doctor and took the flu vaccination, and you have to sign a document that says, I read everything. If I die, it's not my doctor's fault. No, but talking about employees and liability, it is much simpler to say it is your choice. Like, of course, it's my opinion. My business is super simple in that sense. But still, we go to clients' homes, and that's why I'm so interested in this conversation. How far can we go, and how far should we go?
Yes, I think you're a perfect example of, trying to figure out what's best for your business, safest for your employees, and safest for your patients and customers. So
thank you so much for the conversation.
Well, you're very welcome. And if you want to, if there's any materials that you'd like, feel free to email me or make an appointment with me so that we can discuss it further as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisca.
You're more than welcome. Deidre did bring up a good point. She stated employee retention is going to benefit your business and the economy. So definitely, work with Orlando and, let's get you connected with CJ so she can assist you with any other questions that you have, because I agree, this whole thing is very confusing as far as like what boundaries you may be stepping over to require somebody to take the vaccine.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
I don't.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
No problem. So in the chat box, and I'm going to send this to you via email, if you have a moment, please take our survey. It's just going to ask questions how we did. Is there any other workshops that maybe be of interest to you that we can possibly present in the future? And after this workshop, I will be sure to send over her PowerPoint and her contact information. I do want to let you know that we will be having CJ again on February 19th, to which we will be discussing mental health strategies. So we're going to take a dive into small business employees that are struggling with performance and mental health issues, because that's become a big issue that our advisors are having to deal with the small businesses and the employees. So we welcome you to join us. I'm going to drop the link, and I will also be sure to include it in the email so you can sign up for that class or any other classes that we have coming up that may be of interest to you. And
Please put it on the email because I cannot open it this way. Okay.
Sure, I can do that, Eloisa, no problem.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And again, I want to thank everybody. CJ, thank you. Greatly appreciate it. And I hope.
Thank you so much for having me.
Definitely. I hope everybody stays safe and warm today, and y'all have a great weekend, okay?
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.